So we both just watched Fallout, the new Amazon adaptation of the video game series.
Coming at it from two different perspectives. You, who have played every Fallout game, I think, and really like them.
I've only played 3 and 4 all the way through, and then I have played New Vegas. I have not played the original ones, Fallout, Fallout 2, Fallout Beyond Thunderdome, or whatever. I haven't played those.
And me, who has never played a Fallout game. The only Fallout that I'm familiar with is from after getting married. It's okay.
I guess I will say straight up that this is by far the most faithful video game adaptation that has been made, period.
Bob Hoskins is ashamed of you.
He gave it an impressive try, I will admit. But honestly, this show is so faithful that I wouldn't be surprised if going forward they make it a canonical part of the background of the games.
Okay, well, that was a question I had. How much of this show did not exist in the game canon?
The main story is original to the show, of the secret behind all the vaults and the reason for the atomic bombs falling and everything like that. If somebody knows more about that in the comments, go ahead and put it in there because it might contradict the games in terms of the explanation for the war. But I think there's little enough information given in the games. You could probably find a way to twist it and make it work, I think.
Even though you haven't played the first two games, are you familiar with the story of those?
Not specifically. So that's actually another point is I don't know if they have a strict continuity going from those original games to Fallout 3 and everything after that because it switched developers at that point.
Because that was Interplay at first, right?
I don't know. I know Obsidian made Fallout New Vegas, and I know at least some of those were people that developed the original ones, but I really don't know much about before Fallout 3.
Fallout 1 was Interplay, and Fallout 2 was Black Isle Studios, and Interplay just published it. But from the game perspective and the show perspective, the different factions of people, that's all the same, right? Like there are ghouls and the people in the vaults and the people on the surface.
Yeah, and the games take place in different times and different locations, so depending on which one you're playing, the relationships between the different factions can be different. Which is part of what makes it interesting is each game is kind of you as the player are influencing what happens between the factions and you kind of decide which side you're going to be on.
By different times, is that 5 years, 100 years?
Good question. Let me check real quick.
So clearly we don't know what we're talking about, and if you're still watching this video, you should just skip to the part where we start talking about the show. I thought because you would play the games, you would be able to answer these questions.
Well, see, that's a thing that is relevant to mention, I think, is that the games do have good stories in their own way, and they do get you invested and want you to keep going to see what happens in the story of each game, but the reason you're invested is because you are a part of it. It's not necessarily something that you are super invested in just in terms of the story itself on its own merits. It's just there as kind of a background to build the game around.
So how does Fallout 76 fit into all of that?
Fallout 76 is called Fallout 76 because that's the number of the vault that is involved in that game. And that is an online game where you're playing with a bunch of other people. So really it's just another Fallout game. It's just that there are a lot of other actual people in that world. They are taking place in the same world in terms of like the Fallout world. But again, each game is in its own time and in its own location. Yeah, I thought it would be easy just typing in Fallout timeline, but it's giving me stuff going back to like the Middle Ages and stuff, so I don't know.
It's like typing in, what is the Zelda timeline?
It looks like they're not too far apart from each other, starting from Fallout 3. There is over 100 years between Fallout 1 and 3, but then from there it's just a few years between each next one. And it looks like the TV series actually takes place a little farther in the future from any of the games. I actually was not interested when I first heard that there was going to be a Fallout show because I was thinking, I don't play those games for the story. I play them for the experience. I look at them almost as like a simulation of what would I do if I was in this post-apocalyptic world and had the motivations of my character.
I mean, isn't that the definition of a role-playing game?
I would say not necessarily, not if you're playing something that has its own characters that you're playing as. Which is part of what people didn't like about Fallout 4 is that that one has you playing as a specific character more so than Fallout 3 or New Vegas did, where it's more like you put yourself in the character. I mean, I would say like something like a Final Fantasy game is not a game that you put yourself into the character.
Although there are those weirdos that instead of using the default character names, use their own name. Yes, I'm judging you. People wanted to make a Fallout show for a long time, but whoever made the final decision only made it once Jonathan Nolan was behind the helm.
Yeah, I did read that. I guess he's a big fan of the games, and he definitely seems to understand how they work.
And he did Westworld, right?
I think so.
And I haven't seen that, but that's kind of the same type of vibe, isn't it?
I haven't seen it either, but I mean, they are both in the future. I was going to say with robots, but this show didn't really have as much in the way of robots. You had like the Mr. Handy robot, but that was about it. The games have a lot more robots. Some other robots that are modeled on Robbie the Robot from Forbidden Planet and the robot from Lost in Space, and even some other robots besides those. And I wonder if maybe there's like a rights issue as to them not being able to put that in a TV show, use those specific designs. And the games do have a lot more in the way of more specific references to other sci-fi things. And the show doesn't really do that I noticed.
They didn't have enough clout. They needed the other Nolan.
I'm surprised they didn't, as far as I know, they didn't play up that they have a Nolan working on it, because I feel like I would have expected them to use that as a big selling point.
From the brother of the man who brought you the Batman movies.
Yeah. But it does also need to be said that the games are very open world, very large, and there are a lot of smaller stories in the different locations that you go to and things that you explore and everything. Whereas this is a show that has 8 episodes that is telling a specific story. And it does have its own subplots, but it's obviously not going to be able to include every aspect of the games.
Speaking of open world, I wish in this show there had been more world building. Yes, there were a lot of characters to keep track of, and for most of it, they were not together, so that makes it harder. But I would have liked to have seen more of the other people in this world and how they lived in it. And we got a little bit of that in Philly and the stray traveler here and there, but for me it was not enough.
I agree. Having played the games, I have a better idea of everything, but I felt that the show did kind of an awkward job of introducing you to the world once you get out of the vault. It kind of felt like it would just jump to a new thing and you were just kind of expected to kind of go along with it, but without really an explanation for why that thing is the way it is. Like the Brotherhood of Steel, or even just some of those people, like you're saying, that are just living out there in the world. Even the overall aesthetic of everything, I feel like in the show, you're just kind of expected to say, oh, I guess that's just what this world is like. But the games have more of a reason for it. There's more of a backstory for why the world developed the way it did. And you don't get that in the show.
And the show, needing to be compelling, did a lot of twisting and turning through these plots and subplots. Although, because it happened almost constantly, I wondered why any characters had accepted any way of life before the start of the show. Because the fact that nothing had ever been normal as they were finding out, and everything they encountered reinforced that fact, made it odd that they kept referring to how things used to be normal.
I agree. I kind of wondered, or no, how do I say it?
You're right.
Okay. I felt like the writers didn't think enough, maybe, about the background of the characters before the show. Like, you get a little bit of Maximus in terms of his motivation for joining the Brotherhood, but I kind of wondered what happened in between him as a kid and then him joining the Brotherhood. It feels like there's almost not really a context for things.
And Lucy, too, because, we started with her at the beginning of the show and saw what her way of life was.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like with her, you had an idea. You see her before everything happens. But the rest of the world needed more of that, I think, more context.
Let's talk about Lucy. Lucy was a simple country girl, you might say a cockeyed optimist, who got herself mixed up in the high-stakes game of faction-based diplomacy and national intrigue.
Is that a reference to something?
No, I completely made that up myself.
Introducing her It gave me the wrong impression of the show that we were following her initially because I thought it really was going to be just about her and using her as a way to kind of explore the world and learn more about what's going on. But then as soon as she gets out of the vault, you're switching to a different character. And I feel like that was a mistake in terms of storytelling.
I'm not sure I agree, but I can see where you're coming from.
Maybe it was that we followed her for too long before we jumped to a different character. It made it feel like it was too big of a shift to something else all of a sudden that I didn't know what was happening anymore. When with her you have more of a sense of what's going on. I thought she was a good character because she really is the main character still, I would say, even though the show does bounce around a lot.
And she's the most relatable to us, the viewer, because we also don't know what's going on out in this world.
Yeah, which is why I think it was a missed opportunity to use her to explore that initially before jumping to other characters. I think maybe that's what they should have done. I wasn't a huge fan of the overall structure of the show, of this season.
My response to that is, I mean, it's one of the Nolans.
That's actually a good point. Yeah, it does feel like that kind of thing in terms of story structure.
I am interested, because I know they greenlit a second season, to see what kind of character she turns into based on everything that she found out in this season.
Okay, I would be too. I didn't know that there was already a second season confirmed. She stayed a little too naive, I thought, after how many different things she went through. And I get that it was supposed to kind of keep her likable and everything, but I thought they pushed it a little too far for too long.
I agree, and I think some of it was also just for the humor aspect.
Yeah, the games do have a lot of humor. It's not quite the same humor as the show. I definitely prefer the humor in the games. I thought a lot of the humor in the show was a little too broad, a little too turn to the audience and say, hey, do you get it? It's a joke. And I did think it was funny, but it's not as funny when you do it like that.
There were too many scenes of slow motion, horrific violence accompanied by doo-wop. The first time, it was humorous, but the fourth or fifth time, it just seemed like a cop-out.
I agree. I wasn't a fan of the way a lot of the action scenes were edited. Too often you have characters that just kind of stand there and watch what's happening instead of reacting to what's happening. And it's done for dramatic purposes, but it was too much for me.
I am hoping for a Terminator 1, Terminator 2 type situation with her character in Season 2.
Maybe not as far as a Terminator to Terminator 2 difference, but definitely she's going to need to change going forward.
All right, let's shift over to Maximus.
Initially, I wasn't a huge fan of Maximus. I don't know how much of it was the actor, but I thought his character was a little too flat for a long time.
Well, could that have been intentional because he was under the boot heel of everybody, and any time he wanted to speak up or stand out, he was just shoved back down in the dirt, so he said it's not even worth it?
I don't think so, because even after he gets the power armor, I still kind of felt the same way. I didn't have a strong enough grasp on his motivations and his specific intentions. It felt like he was just kind of there and more reacting or not reacting to things and just kind of being there.
Okay, I get that. Let me ask you this. Did you feel that he had a redemption arc?
Yes.
Okay, see, I disagree. I do not think he did at all. As the other characters grew and became better people, he did not. Everything he did, every decision he made was out of cowardice or self-gain. And there was that moment near the end where he came clean to Lucy about who he really was. And he made this huge sacrifice for her. But then 5 minutes later, he wet his pants and led the entire Brotherhood right to her. Most of the quote-unquote good guys came out over where they had started, but he did not. And I wouldn't be surprised if in Season 2 he becomes one of the main antagonists, because now he has authority and power, but his character is still a coward.
Interesting. In terms of the way the season ended, I could see that happening, but I would still say that he changed as a character. There does come a point where he is trying to help Lucy instead of just trying to help himself. That doesn't mean he doesn't still have weaknesses, but I feel like he does have more motivations at that point that are relating to other people.
but he's so weak-willed that his motivations bend and break at the slightest pressure.
But they're there when they weren't there before.
I don't think so, because even at the beginning, his thought was the Brotherhood is noble, the Brotherhood is righteous.
That's a good point, but I think he was doing it more out of a sense of revenge at the beginning, as opposed to trying to help anybody. But I would also say that all of that ties into my feeling of him not having developed enough motivations.
It will be interesting to see what happens with him. Maximus. More like Minimus, am I right?
I apologize to everyone listening.
Like and subscribe.
Did you feel like you had a sense of what the Brotherhood was really about or what they were doing?
I felt like they had a long game goal of collecting
Technology?
I guess, and just taking over. But yeah, it was a little ambiguous as to exactly how they were going to do that. Because they already had these people in these giant super suits. I guess my question would be, what were they waiting for?
I hadn't thought about it like that because they do have a lot of resources. It seems like they could easily take over an area and just spread out from there.
Yeah, when they showed up in that fleet of giant airships, I was thinking, they could do a lot.
I feel like the show didn't give you enough backstory on that, didn't give you enough context for them as an organization. In the games, it's clear that this is more of a nationwide thing. This is something that is happening all over the country, and depending on which game you're playing and what you're doing in the game, and even your own personal opinions, the Brotherhood could be the villains, they could be the people that you're siding with. There's a lot of complexity to them, and I didn't feel that that was there in the show.
All right, let's shift over to the Ghoul. Okay, first off, I remember the days when Walton Goggins had all these tiny bit parts. He was just this little comedic actor who would have 3 lines and then he would get blown up or something. It's been pretty wild to watch him slowly get these more prominent roles.
I was really surprised that he was playing such a big role here like that. Yeah, I definitely agree. He has such a distinct face and voice and such distinct mannerisms. He's usually playing a bad guy, I feel like. And like you're saying, he usually gets blown up.
Yeah, he's usually second fiddle to the main bad guy.
But I thought he did a good job in this role. I thought he made it an interesting character, both in the past when he's still a normal person, and in the future when he's the Ghoul.
I agree. So, Walton Goggins, you have our stamp of acting approval.
But please don't get too close to me because you are very scary looking even without the CGI.
If I met him in real life, I wouldn't be able to stop staring at his teeth.
Yes.
He's got so many teeth. You know what he reminds me of? He reminds me of the one little kid from Nightmare Before Christmas, out of the trio.
I was thinking the Chatterer from the Hellraiser movies, but yeah, I guess I could see that.
What are those kids? Lock, Stock, and Barrel, aren't those? Or Lock, Shock, and something like that?
Yeah, Lock, Shock, and Barrel. I think that one was voiced by Paul Rubens. Could be wrong. Let's see. I'm looking up his filmography. So he was in Machete Kills.
Who are we talking about now? Paul Rubens?
Walton Goggins.
Okay, because I was going to say, I don't remember Paul Rubens in Machete Kills.
And he was in Predators. I don't remember anything about Predators, apparently, because I don't remember that.
I remember him in that, and again, he was just one of those side characters who probably got hacked up.
Yeah, I mean, that whole movie, from what I do remember, was all side characters, basically.
And everyone had guns, except for the one guy who had a sword, and he drew his sword and looked at the Predator, and then the Predator threw down his space gun and decided to fight him hand to hand.
Oh, how badass.
Yeah, as a kid, I was like, this is so badass. But as an adult, I'm like, what are you doing?
As a kid, that movie came out in like 2007, I think.
Yeah, I would have been 3 years old.
Oh, 2010, I just looked it up.
Oh, okay, I would have been 6 years old.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, we got distracted. So let's keep talking about the Ghoul. So tell me, in the games, are the inhalers of chemicals and the injections of chemicals, is that what keeps ghouls alive? Or not alive, sane, I guess?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think it's just kind of the amount of radiation you're exposed to. If you're exposed to too much, you turn into a ghoul. If you're exposed to even more, you turn into a feral ghoul, which is like a zombie. Because you do have a lot of ghoul characters in the games that are just basically normal people. They just happen to look like that, and they could live for a long time. I know some of them are people that have been around since the time of the bombs, so they've been around for hundreds of years, which obviously doesn't make real world sense, but, the games are not realistic.
And he was teamed up with that dog for a while, and I know dogs are part of at least one of the games, right?
Yeah, they're in most, if not all of them, and they usually are named dog meat, like he called the dog in the show. Which brings up a point that I have about the show in general. It does make references to a lot of things in the games, and I honestly think I would have liked the show better on that front if I hadn't played the games, because I wouldn't realize that some of those were references. But since I have played the games, and I do know what they come across to me as too distracting from everything else. They feel too out of place. They don't feel natural.
Well, coming at it from a person who has not played any of the games, I did not feel that way.
Given that those are there for the fans of the games, I think most people would probably appreciate them, but I did not. I wish they hadn't been as obvious.
There was one thing I did know from the games, and it was very distracting because it took over the whole scene. It was usually after the opening when that text would show up, because I knew that was the name of the game too.
Okay. I thought you were going to say something legit, but okay.
We have been making videos for long enough that you should know that doesn't happen very much.
Oh, you're right. I guess I'm as naive as Lucy.
I felt his motivations made sense, and the way he was acting based on everything that had happened before the bombs fell, everything he figured out.
Really?
I thought it made sense, and it was good other than just having him be this nasty-looking bad guy, and he's bad because he's nasty-looking.
Okay. I definitely thought he was an interesting character, but I thought there was too big of a difference between his old self and his future self in terms of his personality and the way he handled things. It didn't feel like the same character to me. They didn't convince me that he became that future person.
I felt he was ahead of the curve of everybody else because he knew how much everything sucked and how deceptive everything was.
I mean, that's true, but I didn't feel like his old self would have been just going around shooting people in such a casual, offhand way.
You mean pre-bomb?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think he would have either. I think it took him finding out why the bombs were being dropped, then the bombs being dropped, and just having to deal with the fallout of everything. That totally turned him into his ghoul personality.
I just find it interesting that you're so kind of positive on that when I felt like that was one of the bigger character-based problems I had.
The thing I did not buy was his wife completely selling out the world in that meeting with the rest of the executives. She was a side character that got a decent amount of screen time and development compared to other side characters. And the show established her pretty well. And if that was truly her character, where she was going to actually sell everyone out, then I wanted more lead up to that.
I completely agree. I thought that entire explanation was pretty absurd, and we just kind of were expected to go along with it and just accept it. It reminded me of, this is unrelated, but the Gamera Netflix show has a similar reveal and explanation for everything that's happening. No, it was even more ridiculous in there. But in Fallout, given that I've played the games again, and I know why the war happened in the games, at least on a basic level, it was basically a war between China and the US. China invades Alaska, and it eventually leads to the bombs flying. It was such a big revelation to have be tied into that character. Having Walton Goggins' wife be involved in something that's going to wipe out the entire world was a huge pill to swallow.
And her only justification that we got was, I want us to be safe and taken care of. But her action to achieve that goal did not align.
Yeah, it was just way too implausible. And I was wondering, too, where she was when everything went down. She wasn't there with her husband and daughter.
She'll probably show up in season 2.
Yeah, you're probably right. But also, I wanted to know how the decision was made as to when to drop the bombs and where to drop the bombs. I wanted a little bit more explanation of their actual plan, because they would all have to be prepared. She'd never told her husband up until the bombs actually were being dropped. So in theory, he would have just been killed.
I could see a conflict between the two of them in season 2 where he finds her and she's been frozen or something, so she still looks young. And he says, I was outside, your daughter was outside when the bombs dropped. And she'll say, I didn't know they were going to drop them right then, and I tried to stop them.
Yeah, I could see something like that. We needed at least a little bit in this first season, in the past, relating to that. It's just too big of a question that's too integral to the story of this first season.
Something that could have helped, in addition to just giving it more time, was having their daughter come into those discussions. Because there would be those arguments between Walton Goggins and his wife, and the daughter was always in another room. And it would have worked better if she had come in and said, what are you fighting about? And then they would have to kind of justify their viewpoints, but in a way to not scare their child, but also help their child understand, which would also help us understand.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like it could have been interesting. And when you were first saying that you could see in season 2 him talking to his wife about it, I thought you were going to say in the past that it was more stuff that happened that we didn't see in between everything else. But I think you're right that it would have to be something in the future for it to make sense with what we saw. From the perspective of the games, it is interesting to me that they focused on the vaults so much, because the games usually do involve the vaults to start out, and usually whatever location you're in when you're exploring, you do find other vaults, and they kind of each have their own backstory and stuff like that. But it's really just there as a kind of a starting point for your character most of the time, and just as a way of kind of getting you into the future in a way where your character doesn't know what's happening, so you have a reason to kind of explore and to be new to everything. From a narrative perspective, they're not that much of a focus in the games. So I thought it was interesting that pretty much the entire show is revolving around that. And on the same note, the games involve a lot more of kind of satirizing American culture and American business practices and stuff like that. And in theory, that's kind of the same ideas that you have with the whole plan behind the vaults in the show, but it didn't have the sense of humor to it that the games do, which I thought was interesting given that there is a lot of humor in the show.
Let's talk about the music for a second. So I know from a pop culture perspective that era of songs goes hand in hand with these games. And in this show, there had to have been 100 songs.
Yeah, there were a lot.
There would be single scenes where there would be 3 or 4 different songs. One would fade out and the other one would just fade in. And it did help set the style of the show, but at times it was very distracting.
I agree. There were definitely times when the songs were appropriate for what the scene was, and then there were times where, again, from the perspective of having played the games, it felt like there were certain songs that they felt like they had to put in there somewhere, and almost in a way where it was like, hey, look, it's that song you remember, even if it doesn't really fit.
It also made me feel very old when one of the songs would start playing and I would know what song it was.
Some of the score in the show did also incorporate some of the actual music written for the games.
And that's been different people over the years, right? That's not just one person who's done all of them.
Probably, I would assume. And I don't know if that kind of main theme was there before Fallout 3 or not, but I thought they did a better job incorporating that than some of those specific songs.
Visually, again, from not having played the games, it looked like what I expected from a pop culture exposure to the series. Was it accurate?
Yes, I was incredibly surprised and impressed at how faithful the entire production design was to the games. It literally looks exactly the same. Just thinking about the way adaptations are usually handled, it feels like people have to change things just to change things. It's like, well, it can't be exactly the same. We have to do something. I think of like superhero movies that are changing their costumes from the ones that have worked for decades in the comics. So I'm really surprised that they kept everything exactly the same and that they incorporated so much in terms of so many different background elements and locations and, like the Red Rocket gas station and just all the little things. Everything is the same.
Was it an inside joke from the games that everybody's foot gets messed up or lost?
I don't think so, no. I didn't think about it until you said that.
Okay.
So we had Lucy, Maximus, and the ghoul, and then we would cut back to the vault to see what was going on with Lucy's brother Norm.
And I thought it was good that we still had a presence in the vault, because it would have been lame to never go back there once Lucy left.
Interesting. You have such different opinions from mine. I felt like for most of the show when they were cutting back to that, I was kind of thinking This is really getting dragged out. Where is it going? Why do we need to stay with these characters? And it did end up going somewhere, but I don't know that I feel it was necessary or that it added all that much.
From a narrative perspective, tying everything together, it worked, but it felt a little too TV showy.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And again, the vaults being as important as they are, it does make sense to keep following what's happening. I just felt like maybe there wasn't enough going on from scene to scene there. It took too long for that to go anywhere.
As far as Hank, Lucy, and Norm's dad was concerned,
I thought he was another character that needed a bit more exploration to make that twist feel like it made sense for his character, because that's all stuff that had happened before we met him in the show. But I went back to see him in that first episode again.
it was too hard a pill to swallow based on what we had seen from him up to that reveal.
Yes, and the way he talked about things and just everything. It felt like too much of just a TV show thing of here's this twist to this character that you thought was this, and it turns out it's something else.
Yeah, he suffered the same side character lack of development as Walton Goggins' wife.
I wouldn't mind a season 2, but I wouldn't necessarily want to keep following these characters. I would rather follow somebody else.
And there's a big chance that he will re-team up with Barb because he was her assistant in the past scenes.
Which one was Barb?
I'm tired of saying Walton Goggins' wife.
Oh, okay. I guess there's a lot of different directions they could go in with a lot of these characters. Maybe he'll get some kind of redemption arc or whatever.
Since a lot of the twists are very TV showy, I wouldn't be surprised if Barb herself was behind everything.
That unfortunately sounds plausible.
Yeah, that would be unfortunate, to be clear.
I was impressed, along with the production design, at the quality of the effects for being an Amazon TV show. I'm not a fan of CGI generally, but I thought the way they used things in this show was not bad for the most part. Again, except for some of those slow motion things. It fit the look of everything. At least from what I remember, there wasn't anything that was overly out of place in terms of the CGI-ness of it. And that includes the ghoul's face without his nose and everything.
What about the Gulper? How'd you feel about that?
Thought it was fine for the show. Again, it's not something where I'd be like, man, these effects are so cool, you gotta watch this. But I thought it worked for the show. Oh, I did think the bear was a little too fake. The one that attacks the guy that Maximus was with. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's all I have to say about the effects.
So obviously a lot of questions at the end from a narrative perspective. I really hope they take Moldaver's cold fusion thing and do something with it. It literally changes the entire world. But with all of the emotionally charged reveals and betrayals and everything in those scenes at the end, the cold fusion thing got pushed to the back burner, and I sincerely hope it does not stay there. Yes, the main character's stories and struggles are important from a personal perspective, but the unlimited energy plot point affects not just the main characters, but the entire planet.
That's true.
So maybe that will be Barb as the main antagonist, her motivation to shut that shit down.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of like the next, I guess, like the linchpin of the next season that everybody's trying to get after, instead of a severed head this time. I didn't like the way this season ended. I was really hoping it was going to close off and be a finished thing. And again, like I said, I would prefer that the next season would follow other characters. But with the way it does end, it really is clear that it's going to keep going with these characters.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't fall flat.
I mean, I'm predicting a Stranger Things kind of situation where the first season is good and then it falls apart and gets too caught up in its own popularity.
Yeah. Well, it was good while it lasted.
There's our review of Season 2 of Fallout.
No, we will actually do a review Season 2. And it will start off with both of us just going, So if you haven't watched the show, you're on the fence, I would recommend it. Would you recommend it?
I definitely didn't think it was bad. I was very impressed from a production standpoint, but I didn't love it. I thought it was good, but nothing that I would go out of my way to recommend.
I think that's the most glowing review of anything you've ever given.